You want more than just the headlines? Find out what's going on and what it means with me, Dennis Prager, this morning at 11, right here on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Well, much anticipated new book from Jonah Goldberg, National Review. We've talked to him a number of times over the last several months, and he was working on it, and we were waiting patiently for it. And finally, it is here, Amy. Yeah, that's right. Finally, it's here. You know, he likes to do that. He likes to
tease people.
Exactly. You know, make you want it more. Yeah. His new book is Suicide of the West: How the Rebirth of Tribalism, Populism, Nationalism, and Identity Politics is Destroying American Democracy. Jonah Goldberg from National Review joins us now. Jonah, thanks for being with us again. Appreciate it.
It's great to be here. And look, I thought we all understood that in this day and age, it's all about the tease. It's all about,
yes.
Yes. Tune in this time next week to see what happens. Who gets kicked off, Trump Island or whatever. And that's how life works.
That's
now.
how President Trump lured in Kim Jong-un. He broke up with him before he could break up with him, and now they're making amends.
There you go.
Yeah, and eventually he's going to give a flower to Kim. So.
You're such a showman, Jonah.
What to wear.
So, Suicide of the West: How the Rebirth of Tribalism, Populism, Nationalism, and Identity Politics. It's a lot of isms plus identity politics. Destroying American Democracy. Pick an ism or identity politics and offer your thesis.
Sure. If you wanted to make it an ism, you can call it identitarianism, but I don't want to use that word. But that is the right word for it. So take identity politics, right? One of the most part of the argument of my book is that democracy, free speech, human rights, natural rights, property rights, the market, all of these things are essentially unnatural in the sense that for 250,000 years, human beings did not organize their lives around any of these institutions or concepts, and they did not appear until remarkably recently in the evolutionary record. And so one of the things I try to do in the book is point out how precious and brief this miracle we have of prosperity really is. For 250,000 years, the average human being everywhere in the world lived on $3 a day or less. And then once and only once in all of human history did that start to change. It started to change in England because of liberal democratic capitalism, the Enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. I call it the miracle. Radically transformed the way we thought about ourselves and the kind of civilization we wanted to live in. So take identity politics. One of the most amazing things the Founding Fathers did was get rid of titles of nobility. Throughout human history, all around the world for the last 10,000 years, in every city-state, sort of civilization, there was this notion that some people were just born better or more deserving than other people. And the Founding Fathers got rid of that. They junked it. Now, we still had slavery. We can talk about slavery in a second, and that was a terrible evil and hypocrisy. But this idea that we should all be recognized on merit was planted in American soil, and it's taking time to grow. The thing about identity politics is it's a very reactionary, sort of ancient way of looking at the world, which says I can reduce an entire person's life to a single abstract category, be it race, a sexual preference, whatever. That sort of thinking isn't modern. It isn't woke. It's ancient. It is the way we used to categorize people from serfs and peasants to, this tribe versus my tribe for tens of thousands of years. And it's making a comeback with a lot of fancy jargon around it. And we now live in this age where I can reduce all black people to a single historical grievance. I can reduce, I can say that I know all I need to know about somebody because of the color of their skin. That's what identity politics does, and it needs to be rejected.
I just want to pick up on this. I mean, I definitely agree with all that, but I want to pick up on this idea of the miracle, as you call it. I read an excerpt from your book that you posted on National Review. You say, I say miracle, you write, I say miracle because it evokes a glorious but inexplicable mystery, not because it was bequeathed by the Almighty. And you start the piece, too, talking about, you're taking God out of the argument. And you just referenced the founders. And I wonder if you're concerned at all that you're promoting sort of self-deification, because the one thing the Declaration of Independence in the Bible we're both clear on is we can't deify ourselves.
Oh, look, it's a huge part of my argument that's exactly what we're doing, and it's a terrible thing. I put it under the label of romanticism, which puts feelings and an internal authenticity as the highest standards of things. You know, we teach kids today, Hollywood teaches everybody today, go with your guts, go with your feelings. The only person you have to worry about is being true to yourself. I think that's a terrible trend in our culture. I'm not an atheist. I'm not saying that God doesn't exist. And at the end of the book, you know, God basically sneaks back in, because I think one of the reasons we're in the mess we're in is we've lost this conception of being God-fearing, of worrying that even when I'm alone or even when no one else is watching, God is watching me. That's one of the things that made the miracle possible. The reason I say the reason the first sentence of the book is there is no God in this book is simply to say that I'm not making an appeal to authority. I'm trying to persuade people who disagree with me. And if I say to a bunch of progressives, hey, we got the miracle, we got all this stuff because God gave it to us, that doesn't work on them. That certainly doesn't work on an atheist. An appeal to authority is a logical fallacy unless everybody agrees beforehand on the authority. And so what I'm trying to do is work with progressives' own terms and say you claim to care about poverty, you claim to care about bigotry, you claim to care about public health, all of these things. Well, liberal democratic capitalism is the only thing in human history that is proven to fix those things, to improve those things, and we should have some gratitude for it. And the reason why I say there's no God in this book is we can't just simply say, let Jesus take the wheel. There is no right side of history here. As Ronald Reagan used to say, we're always just one generation away from tyranny because we do not inherent freedom in our blood. You have to fight for it, and you have to teach it to every generation. And so the no God in this book thing. Yeah. I'm sorry, go on.
No, but you wrote too, before the miracle, human life was nasty, brutish, and short.
Yeah, the average, people like to ask, why is there poverty? We know why there's poverty. Poverty is the natural human condition. As a species and as individuals, we're all born, naked, penniless, and ignorant. The only interesting question is, why is there wealth? And there's only one answer in all of human history, and it's this bizarre miracle that we stumbled into that has caused human prosperity to skyrocket around the world in the span of 6 lifetimes, while it stayed basically flat and near zero for 7,500 lifetimes.
Right, and not to prompt you to do another Carrie Underwood reference, but just to go back to this for a second, I understand what you're trying to do with the jujitsu of using the progressives' own stated positions against them, kind of working their logic against them. But is it possible to be persuasive if there's no appeal to truth? Right? I mean, if you believe that the Bible is the foundation of truth, and it's the foundation of our founding documents, and thus the foundation of our country, Judeo-Christian religious tradition, then don't you at some point have to make the case about the choice that we all have to live in a kind of live the way of nature or the way of grace, as it were?
Yeah, that's at the end of the day, it's not going to be my job to go around proselytizing people to certainly not to find Jesus, nor to become better Jews. That's not the role I'm trying to play in. I'm trying to use the logic of the Enlightenment to explain to people on the right and the left that according to the bedrock, the things that everyone says public discourse is supposed to be about, which is science and facts and reason and argument and persuasion, that there is no way to look at these facts, even if you don't have, even for an atheist, there's no way to look at these facts and not say that this stuff is the only game in town. This is what pulled us out of the muck. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the reasons why we may be heading back into the muck, and I'm perfectly willing to concede this, is that we've lost as a civilization the binding glue that religion provides, and the sense of self-denial and delayed gratification that comes with being religiously informed. I'm a big fan of religion. I'm a big fan of Christianity. I like Catholicism so much I married one. I'm not trying to denigrate religion. What I am trying to do is just sort of bring people a little closer to where the facts are, regardless of appeals to religion.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to get clarity on that. One other thing you referenced too is John Rawls, who's sort of the celebrated theorist of the left, is maybe the godfather of social justice, as it's kind of well, maybe it's been bastardized in terms of what he was thinking, but I think there's references to him in terms of what people are actually doing in the modern context. And I wonder if what you're trying to do by evoking Rawls is take his original position, and that's another jujitsu play against the left. If you want to conceive, or if you want to kind of start from Rawls's original position argument, then now look at what you have done, the society you've created from this sort of foundational philosophy where you started.
Yeah, I mean, let me just sort of push back on one thing. Look, I've paid my dues in doing lots of, liberal tears are delicious kind of argumentation, and that's not what I'm trying to do in this book. You said a couple of times now, jujitsu against the left and all that kind of stuff. I'm not trying to beat up the left here. I'm actually trying to model behavior that I think is really lacking on the right these days, and actually try to persuade people who disagree with me in good faith. And okay. I make all sorts of concessions to the left. I don't write anything I don't believe to be true in the book, but I make all sorts of concessions to the left in an effort of good faith to sort of try and persuade people, which is one of the reasons why I find some of the left-wing reviews of this book, their hostility and bad faith, really kind of astounding. On the question about Rawls, yeah, that's part of the argument. I mean, part of the argument is if you were a visitor from outer space and you looked at the way human beings behaved, and you had to go live amongst us, you would be a fool if you didn't pick sometime in the last 50 years. The Rawls argument, as you clearly know, is that imagine you were in some limbo where all you knew is you were going to be born in some place and some time on Earth, but you didn't know if you're going to be poor, rich, black or white, right, gay or straight, or any of those kinds of things. What time on Earth would you pick and what place? And you would pick somewhere in Western Europe or the United States basically in the last 20 years because you're just playing the odds about who you're going to be. Now, my problem, just for the sake, I mean, it's a little unrelated, but my problem with Rawls, or one of my problems with Rawls, is that his argument completely falls apart, or his moral authority completely falls apart on the issue of abortion. Because, the one thing, if you were in that limbo, trying to figure out where you were going to be born, the one thing that you would want to guarantee before anything else was that you'd be born at all.
Yes, exactly. So just on the book though, since clarify that for me. So one of the things you're doing then is you're just taking people as at face value. You're not sort of assessing motives. You're just assessing positions and saying, well, if this is what you want, then look at the tracks that can be pursued to get there, and which seems to be more fruitful.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are times when I talk about motives because a big chunk of the book has to do with, evolutionary science and human nature and why we do what we do. But it's not a sort of partisan left-right kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, part of my problem is with the tribalism, and on the right, and I don't like populism and all that stuff either. But at the core, look, Hannah Arendt used to say that every generation, Western civilization is invaded by barbarians. We call them children. And anybody who's had kids knows that kids come with a bunch of preloaded software, right? They have a bunch of instincts and responses. There's a wonderful book by a guy named Paul Bloom called Just Babies, just summarizing all of the research that they do on the preloaded moral software that babies have. Babies cry in distinct national accents. There's always fascinating stuff. And my point is that we come into we are born not into the United States or Western civilization. We're born into families. And the barbarians that are born into our families, they need software updates. And you hear people say all the time, oh, you have to be taught to hate. That's just factually untrue. You have to teach people you have to teach people not to hate. we all come wired with a deep distrust of strangers because that's how we evolved, or that's how the evolutionary science says we evolved. Because if you didn't, strangers were the enemy. The tribe was everything. The tribe was us, was my family, my politics, my religion, my entertainment, my faith. It was everything. And everything outside of the tribe was to be distrusted. The beautiful thing about the market is that it lowers the barrier to interaction with strangers. In a state of nature, if you're carrying a bushel of apples and I want your apples, I hit you over the head with a rock and take your apples. In a market, I give you money. You like money. I like apples. It's win-win.
No, I think that's really well said. It's very interesting. The part about where you're talking about kind of the concerns about the right. You mentioned nationalism. Nationalism is a part of the isms that are in the title of the book, and I wonder what exactly you mean. Kind of the current incarnation of nationalism that troubles you. This is sort of jingoism, or what you're referencing specifically?
Yeah. So this is an argument I have. It's a good faith argument with several of my colleagues, including Rich Lowry, the editor of National Review, who's not only a handsome man, but he's a powerful man. But my view about nationalism is look, all poisons, all of them are measured in the dose, right? And so a little nationalism, I think, is healthy. It's sort of like salt, right? A pinch of salt brings out the flavor in the meal. It brings all the dishes, all the ingredients together. A little too much salt can ruin the meal. Way too much salt can literally kill you. And so my problem with nationalism is partly just the problem of degree. I prefer the language of patriotism to the language of nationalism. Nationalism invariably lends itself to a lot of us versus them thinking. It lends itself often, though not necessarily, but often to a kind of ethno-nationalism, which I think is contrary to what this country was always about. My ultimate problem with, sorry, my dogs are going nuts up there.
Problem.
My ultimate problem with nationalism is that invariably, if you think, that our politics has to be about the expression of nationalist sentiment, that is almost always going to mean centralization and empowering the government in Washington, because the government in Washington is the only institution in the entire country that has any claim to speak for the whole country. And so nationalism historically is deeply, Marxists want to tell you that that nationalism and socialism are opposites. But historically, in every country that goes hardcore nationalist, it becomes hardcore socialist. Every country that becomes hardcore socialist becomes hardcore nationalist, because the two words in economics and in politics are essentially interchangeable.
Yeah, and that references another great book you wrote, Liberal Fascism. He is Jonah Goldberg. He's joining us with his K9 studio audience. National Review columnist, author of the book Suicide of the West, How the Rebirth of Tribalism, Populism, Nationalism, and Identity Politics is Destroying America. Suicide of the West. Pick it up. Jonah, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you.
And he joined us on our Turnkey Depot